The River Rhine starts in the Swiss Alps, then flows west along the northern Swiss border before turning mostly northward, dividing France and Germany. It continues through Germany and eventually reaches the Netherlands, where it empties into the North Sea. In 55 BC, the Rhine and the English Channel were the only bodies of water that the Roman army had encountered but not yet crossed. Julius Caesar, more for show for the audience in Rome than military necessity, made his way across both of them that year. When he crossed the Rhine, he was moving from Gaul into Germania. Caesar stayed there for just 18 days. Germania was the name Romans used for the lands in northern Central Europe, east of the River Rhine. It was also called Magna Germania, to distinguish it from the Roman provinces in Gaul, on the western side of the Rhine, Germania Superior and Germania Inferior. Among the sources that have been preserved, Caesar is the first to write about Germanic peoples in his commentaries on the Gallic War. He differentiates them from Gauls and concludes that they are braver and more warlike. He says that their whole life is occupied with hunting and war, and that they are used to hard life from childhood. They eat mostly milk, cheese and meat, and don't do much agricultural work. We should note, though, that Caesar never went far into the territory east of the Rhine, and that he mostly met those of the Germans that had crossed the river into the Gaul. Over 50 tribes lived in the land that the Romans named Germania, and they most likely didn't share one common identity, even though they had similar languages, lifestyle, religion, and script. By 50 BC, Caesar had conquered Gaul, but the Rhine continued to serve as the boundary between the Roman Empire and the barbarian territories. In 27 BC, Augustus became the first Roman emperor. He doubled the size of the empire by finishing the takeover of Hispania, conquering places like Raetia and Noricum in what is now Switzerland, Bavaria, Austria and Slovenia. He also took control of Dalmatia and Pannonia in the Balkans and expanded Rome's African territories and annexed Egypt into the imperial fold. Expansion and growth was the motto of the day, of the decade. After all, Jupiter himself professed that the children of Romulus and Remus will make the greatest empire the world has seen. It was only logical to plan the next step of the expansion, east of the Rhine. In the winter of 17 or 16 BC, some Germanic tribes crossed the river into Gaul and attacked the 5th Legion, stealing its Aquila, Roman military standard. Romans got their casus belli, and the game was on. In 13 BC, Augustus sent his stepson Drusus to pacify the barbarian tribes. At 25 years of age, Drusus was a rising star in the Roman army. 4 years earlier, in 17 BC, he and his brother Tiberius defeated the Alpine tribes in Raetia and added their lands to the empire. In preparation for invasion, Drusus built military bases and canals. His main base was probably near today's Oberaden, on the river Lippe north of Dortmund. When the archaeologists examined ancient Roman waste that they found in the ancient toilets of the base, they witnessed the glory of Roman logistics. Even in the German lands in the back of beyond, 1,000 miles from Rome, Roman soldiers managed to eat their Mediterranean vegetables and even pepper from India. Anyway, whatever they ate, they travelled across Germania and fought battles and won battles, and then they returned back to their base, and in a couple of years they did it again, and again. By the time he fell from his horse in 9 BC, Drusus had defeated the Germanic tribes multiple times and went all the way to the River Elbe in the east. The tribes were beaten up, but the land was not conquered. The Drusus's fall was fatal. He died either from gangrene in the broken leg or from internal injuries. While he was dying, his brother Tiberius, who was to replace him, rode 1,000 kilometers to be by his side, and thus became a Roman legend. He continued his brother's job for 2 years before Augustus replaced him. In 4 AD, Tiberius returned, and by 6 AD he finished the job and declared Germania pacified. Among others, he fought and subdued the Cheruski tribe and declared them friends of the Roman people. In the year 7 AD, Augustus made Publius Quinctilius Varus the first officially appointed governor of the newly created Roman province of Germania. Now, 2 things in life were sure for the good people east of the Rhine: death, lesser of problems, because they had that even without the Romans, and taxes. A year or so before the Aquila of the 5th Legion was stolen, sometime in the year 18 or 17 BC, somewhere in the woodlands of Germania, Arminius, a prince of the Cheruski tribe, was born. His father, Chief Segima, was a Roman ally. The Cheruski people were one out of at least 50 Germanic tribes, and they lived in the area of the Weser River and present-day Hanover. As we mentioned, they were allies of Rome, and, in those times, Rome often took the sons of tribal leaders as hostages, a practice that aimed to ensure the loyalty of the tribes, while simultaneously assimilating these individuals into Roman culture. These young men, often future leaders, were brought to Rome, educated in Roman customs and trained in military and administrative skills. The idea was that upon returning to their native lands, they would act as Roman allies, loyal to the empire because of their personal ties and shared cultural understanding. This is the fate that befell the two sons of Chief Segima, Arminius and his younger brother Flavus. Segima sent his sons to Rome to receive an education and to later serve as Roman auxilia, foreign-born troops fighting in the Roman army. Arminius received his military education and served in the army from year 1 AD to 6 AD. According to Roman historian Velleius Paterculus, he became a Roman citizen and earned himself an equestrian rank. Equestrians, or cavalry, exclusively provided the praefecti, commanders, of the imperial army's auxiliary forces, and it seems Arminius was one. We know he was deployed to the Balkans, where he fought in the Pannonian Wars. In the year 7 or 8 AD, he returned to his native lands. He established himself as a Roman loyalist in the Balkan campaigns and came back to Germania as an officer of the Roman auxiliary forces. Trusted by the Roman governor Publius Quinctilius Varus, he was tasked with assisting Roman authorities in consolidating control over the region, which had been annexed into the empire. He often acted as an informant, scout, and go-between for the Romans, but unbeknownst to Varus and others, Arminius was plotting their destruction. Arminius witnessed firsthand the harshness with which Rome imposed its authority on the Germanic tribes. The Roman administration, under the leadership of Varus, sought to establish direct rule, impose heavy taxes, and enforce Roman legal systems which clashed with the tribal traditions and autonomy valued by the Germanic peoples. This imposition of Roman governance led to resentment among the tribes, and Arminius, despite his Roman training and status, began to sympathize with his people's plight. His exposure to Roman tactics and their attitudes towards the tribes made him increasingly aware of the disparity between Rome's promises of civilization and the reality of Roman occupation. In the end, Arminius decided to use his insider knowledge to lead the rebellion, uniting various Germanic tribes against Rome. Between 6 AD and 9 AD, Rome moved 8 of its legions from Germania to Balkans to help squash the rebellion there. That left Varus with 3 legions, around 18,000 men. Exactly when Arminius began plotting the downfall of the Romans in Germania is unclear. Perhaps he had planned in turning on them when the opportunity presented itself all along. What is clearer is how it happened. In the summer of 9 AD, unrest had been growing amongst the Germanic tribes of northern Germania, especially the Cheruski and their allies. Arminius had evidently been involved in fomenting this in a way which was designed to draw Varus and his legions further north and east. By the early autumn, Varus had campaigned with 3 legions northwards into Lower Saxony. In early September, the Romans entered what is known as the Teutoburg forest in search of the rebellion which apparently was underway in those parts, but which was probably a pure invention designed to draw the Romans away from their border defences nearer the river Rhine. In those days, much of Central and Eastern Europe was still covered in dense primeval forest, which was ideal for ambushing a large Roman army, given that the Roman legions performed at their best in open spaces where their drill tactics and superior weaponry could be used to best effect. Arminius was acting as one of their guides as Varus led his 3 legions and cohorts, approximating in all to about 20,000 men, ever further into the forest. Arminius and his Germanic allies finally sprung their trap on the 8th of September. The exact location where the Battle of the Teutoburg forest occurred has never been entirely resolved, though there is a general agreement that it took place near Kalkriese, in the Osnabrück region of Lower Saxony, on the modern-day route from Dortmund north to Bremen. Clearly, the Romans had walked into the worst strategic position possible, surrounded by dense forest. The coalition of Germanic tribes that now began attacking them from all sides included the Cheruski, Bructeri, and other tribes like the Angrivari and the Chatti. In all, they probably didn't exceed the Romans by too much numerically, but they had a huge advantage of surprise and in the nature of the terrain. Arminius most likely slipped away from the Roman camp right around the time the ambush was sprung. In the initial fighting, Varus and his 3 legions and auxiliaries suffered serious losses. However, they were not wiped out immediately. Instead, the Germanic tribesmen allowed them to try and retreat south back to safety, and over the next 3 days launched attack after attack from the forest. In this way, the Romans were never able to mount a serious defence, and they were gradually wiped out over the space of 4 days. The Roman historians of these events claimed that Varus took his own life rather than be captured or slain by the enemy. Arminius was then said to have appeared on the scene to behead the man he had conned for several years. He sent the head to Marbod, a king of the Marcomanni, a major confederacy further to the southeast in what is now Czechia. He had hoped to form an alliance with the Marcomanni against the Romans. Marbod refused the offer and sent Varus's head to Rome for burial. The Battle of the Teutoburg forest was one of the greatest defeats the Romans had ever suffered. 3 full legions had been destroyed, and their standards had been lost, a stain on the honour of the Romans. For a few years thereafter, the Romans would attempt to salvage something from years of campaigning here. Eventually, though, they accepted defeat. The old emperor, Caesar Augustus, began ordering a strategic withdrawal to the river Rhine. When he died in 14 AD, he left behind instructions that the great river was to be established as Rome's northern frontier, and that his successor Tiberius should attempt to consolidate Rome's control over its existing territory and abandon any plans to advance the border to the river Elbe. Hence, it is hard to understate how consequential Arminius's overthrow of the Romans at the Battle of the Teutoburg forest was. Had he not forged the alliance which destroyed 3 Roman legions, Rome might have conquered all of Germania. This would have had major consequences for Central Europe in the long term. The people here today would most likely speak some sort of Romance language. Had Rome succeeded in imposing its control, the situation might have resembled that of Gaul, where local Celtic languages disappeared in favour of Latin. Arminius had big plans after the victory in 9 AD. As we have seen, he tried to forge an alliance with the Marcomanni. He also married Thusnelda, the daughter of a leading Germanic warlord of the Cheruski. This resulted in infighting amongst the tribespeople of Germania, as her father, Segestes, was a pro-Roman leader. Moreover, the marriage ended in tragedy when Thusnelda was captured during a Roman raid. She gave birth to Arminius's son, Thumelicus, while in captivity. Unfortunately, we do not know what happened to him thereafter, as the Roman source which describes his life, a fragment of one of the histories of Tacitus, has not survived down to the present day. Arminius certainly did not feature much in his story. The Battle of the Teutoburg forest was the heyday of his career. In the course of the 10s AD, the alliance he had built up amongst the tribes collapsed as they began fighting once again amongst each other. The Romans facilitated this and launched numerous raids into Germania. While they had abandoned the idea of conquering the region east to the river Elbe, they still wanted to try and weaken the Germanic tribes as much as possible to secure the border at the river Rhine. Hence, Arminius's final years were spent fighting the Romans, the Marcomanni, and his fellow Germans. This culminated in 21 AD in the assassination of Arminius by his own people during a power struggle amongst the Cheruski.